Share screen. And we're going to jump to the PowerPoint. Okay, you do have agendas in front of you. You'll note for your icebreaker, your zoning district or land use is on the top of your agenda. But tonight we're going to give you a couple of updates on kind of where we've been at with some activity, recent activity, including a marathon of a day that we've had today with some stakeholder conversations. And then really get us, so that'll kind of give us our engagement update. We want to give you an update on where we're at with goals and some changes to made and some conversations last week. And then really jump to that land use planning workshop where hopefully had some time to think about things over the last week from the little homework assignment we gave. So we'll be kind of working together and understanding your thoughts and putting that kind of on a collaborative map here as we're working together too. So yeah, like normal, we'll go around and do our introductions. And we want to know, based on the category or district that Amy wrote on the top of your agendas, what type of development or redevelopment you'd like to see in the community based on the category that you were given. So we'll put you on the spot, but throw it out there. It's whatever it might be. So let you start.
I'm sorry, you want me to tell you what about residential?
So what type of development or redevelopment you'd like to see?
Residential, I'd like to see residential development. I guess I don't know, I mean.
So like, is there a specific
No,
area?
a nice variety, you know, and that can go anywhere around town. We got a big area around town, we got some infill in town. Everything's wide open, in my opinion.
So I'm Chris Holtkamp, I have commercial, and I'd really like to see redevelopment more than new development. I think we have a lot of underutilized and older strip centers that can be redeveloped into more intensive commercial uses, like along North Main Street and like the one by Dixon. It's nothing against like the businesses that are there or anything else, but you know, there's older, pretty low density, kind of not that most attractive of typology. So I think we could redevelop a lot of commercial space and really meet a lot of needs without building new stuff.
Mike Woolsey, I have residential, and I think just overall, just looking at the housing study and what we use for guidance, and just knowing what we need to add, and you know, how far behind are we in certain categories of product and that kind of thing. And you know, that's homework I should be doing or checking in on myself. But I mean, are we doing what's necessary? I feel like we've improved. We've got things happening in the city right now, but is it enough? And knowing when it's enough, and then being able to finally relate to that is to convey that to your neighbors when they ask, why are we building this quantity of housing in this place? And to be able to communicate that to them, that it's based on studies we've done and shit like that. So
I have commercial and.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go
I was
ahead.
gonna ask you a question, sorry, I
Go ahead.
didn't interrupt. So, talking about that, we're in the process of getting another, housing study done, right?
The update.
Yes,
yes.
the update, okay, sorry. I thought of that when you said it, I'm not sorry.
Yeah. So I think Chris and I would work well together. You can redevelop. I will do new development. I think where Sterling Ponds, the northwest tip, where it's not necessarily Sterling Ponds, but it's the Thompson property. Daphne and Kelly, I don't know who owns it now, but the top tip right on Highway 35, and that would not only serve the people in Sterling Ponds with bread, milk, so you don't have to drive all the way into town, maybe a little bit of fun house for kids. And then if they do go through with the development of the apartments, that would also help those people.
Lisa Moody and I have Corporate Park. I guess just initial thoughts looking at the north. There's so many things going on up there that I don't know how to add to that, but I look at the east, I look at the property, which is landlocked across the bypass in 29. I know you've met with stakeholders earlier, and I just look at, it's just a waste of, and I hate to say a waste because it's being farmed, but it just, to be able to connect that and then get 900th Street to be able to connect that, and you've got a great area for corporate, university connection, hospital connection. My first thought.
There's even a quick trip up there.
Well, and that tends to draw, because you can get lunch, you can get milk, get, restaurants. I mean, that whole strip that goes, the old lamplight building.
Yeah.
Splash zone, I'm dating myself, but, that whole area is underutilized. I mean, there's businesses out there, but it's so underutilized that it could be.
Are you talking about that strip of Boston?
Well, no, not Wasson, because that's Tech College, but go across,
Yeah,
across the way.
From Cascade to Cemetery.
I'm starting at the intersection, the northeast corner, that's landlocked.
Okay.
And then going south from there, across the bridge, get past Sunstone, and then the old lamplight parcel, and you've got a motorcycle shop, and you've got, so there's just areas there that could be more corporate stuff.
Well, Oregon, I'm Diana Dean, I have commercial.
It's,
Okay, yeah, that would be a good place for some commercial development, maybe, since we already have the quick trip there, although I don't think maybe commercial in terms of automobile businesses to serve a racetrack. But and also I agree with Chris and Patricia about their ideas, but I also think we could do some redevelopment of downtown. There are some underutilized buildings. We have a lot of thrift stores, which are fine, but we have a lot of thrift stores. We could have a little bit more vibrant retail commercial downtown.
Excellent. Yeah, go ahead.
Condone, I got residential, so I would, echo the sentiments of Diane. I would say mixed use development, redeveloping downtown, and even new mixed use development in other areas of town, so.
And I apologize, I very rudely did not even think to introduce Greta on the SRF team, so I'll let Greta introduce herself. We just jumped right in like it's normal business, but.
Yeah, I'm Greta. I'm here with staff from SRF. I'm also applying.
So Greta has been doing a lot of work on our outdoor recreation plan. She got to spend a day, I don't know how long ago, going out and doing all the physical inventory and things like that. So she's a huge help for us today from the stakeholder conversations too. So anyway, I apologize for just. Yeah.
I have Corporate Park. Obviously, I'm not as familiar with River Falls as everyone else here, but I just think in general, it's very large surface parking lots that could be redeveloped.
I'm Alicia, I'm a city planner, and I have residential, and I would be interested in exploring the ways to potentially do like mother-in-law apartments or accessory dwelling units, something that in appropriate locations can provide housing that may be more attainable for certain folks.
Amy Peterson, Community Development Director. Initially, I have commercial, and I initially thought about infill mixed use. And then when some of you were talking about locations, I started thinking about that too. And I had put it out at the corner of Division and U up by Man Valley. So.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll keep chugging along here on our agenda with our engagement update. So we've had a few things that have been, it's only been a month since we had a June meeting, but there's been a lot of activity in that month, and that includes some pop-up events, including I think the most recent one was probably River Falls, right? Do you want to give a quick update on that, Candace?
It was a very well-attended event. It was a lot of people that from the parade, we handed out magnets. So then they came to our booth and was like, oh, I got the magnet. And so we got to, yeah, and then we got to explain what the process was and why we're doing it, and that was really nice to see new faces, so it was well attended, we got a lot of great feedback.
And so really what the topic that's being engaged on those events is really in the land use frame of reference. So we've got a visual preference, and if you paid attention as maybe you walked down the stairs, you saw that pop-up activity is set up there. But we've got a visual preference survey with some of the example developments that we talked about as a group, getting some thoughts on what people would like to see. And then some different iterations of where they might like to see or would support that type of development occurring in the community. And then we also have a building block exercise as a way to start to understand kind of massing of and what, we kind of left it a little bit open of, whether you build a downtown or build a space in River Falls, but allowing people to kind of play with taking it into 3-dimension versus just being as well. So that's been used a couple of times, will continue to be used in events that pop up as well. But we also have transitioned those activities into an engagement activity on Engage RF as well. So there's multiple opportunities to kind of get that input as well. So since it's still active, we haven't put together a summary, but we'll make sure to share all of that feedback that comes in on those activities for you as well. But then our stakeholder, and maybe I'll jump to Engage RF updates as well. We did at the end of the month close the ideas activity that was up on Engage RF that kind of just helped us confirm some of the goals that we've been working on and things like that. The bike pin map is still up and active. There's the new land use activity survey that we were just talking about. And then just a heads up for you all as well. Last night we met with the Outdoor Rec Steering Committee and have worked through the quantitative part of our needs assessment, running those numbers that when we compare River Falls to communities of similar sizes, how are we doing in the number of baseball fields we have, the number of soccer fields, number of playgrounds. So that gives us kind of a metric of how we're doing in comparison. The conversation that we had last night was now let's take it to the qualitative side to ask the public, do they agree with these numbers, or are there facilities that we don't have that we want to understand if people have interest in developing and things of that nature? So that is the next phase for outdoor rec, and there will be a survey that pops up on Engage RF specific to that, and we will also be taking those activities out to pop up specific pop-ups just for the outdoor recreation plan as well. So those are still a little TBD, but we've been looking at using fighting fish as an opportunity, and then is it art on the kitty? Is that yes? As our other opportunity where the timing just kind of works out with that event. So having those pop-ups be directly connected to recreational activity as well. So yeah, the survey will be reviewed by that steering committee before it goes live. So it'll be a little bit before that one actually goes live. We've also talked about doing that in a hard copy form as well. So if we dropped it off at, at the pool where there's swimming lessons or, at different events and things, to just kind of spur it and add additional input from that perspective too. But then our stakeholder conversations. So I joked that it was a marathon of the day. We've had 4 90-minute conversations today, and we've got 2 more tomorrow. So I think we've talked a lot about what this format is, but really we've been spending the first 20 minutes or so with these groups, giving them an update of what our process is, where we're at, why we're having these conversations, and then using chunk of time to work through some facilitated conversations to get their input and thoughts on where we're headed or some ideas that we've tested and things like that. So At 9 o'clock this morning, we met with a group of, some recreation was our topical area there. Then we had our conversation with, inclusion and sense of place, which was, an interesting conversation as well. And then we had natural resources right after lunch. And then just before this meeting, we had invited our large tract property owners, to come in for a conversation. That was a little bit of a different format. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but tomorrow we have our housing and local businesses discussions in the morning. So we're fitting it all into a day and a half there as well. But I think it was really, we confirmed a lot of things that we have kind of been hearing, or things that we thought particularly related to natural resources and recreation. I think the interesting part for recreation is we did have a smaller group, but out of the smaller group that we had, our organized sports were represented, our maybe recreation that ties to natural resources in terms of our anglers and things like that. And then we also had grow to share representation. So kind of hitting on the different forms of recreation were all represented in that meeting. So it was interesting to hear where some things aligned, and there were some good ideas shared about how those concepts can merge as well. The inclusion and sense of place had a lot of great ideas as well. And I think there was a lot of, it was an interesting group. I think Patricia, once you stepped away, there was I think most of the people that were in that room had only been members of the community for a certain amount of time. And so we had Pastor Adam, I can't remember which church he is with, but has only been a member of the community for 1.5 years. So also interesting to hear that, perspective from someone who's been around for a while and somebody who's just, getting into a community too. But then we did have our large tract property owners, which was, I think when we first counted, it was 50 people and more people came, 60. We have a sign-in sheet, I didn't count, but so we had a large room there. Everyone else, as a heads up, was when we put together the stakeholder list for all of the other ones, we did emails and phone calls as a form of invitation for large tract property owners. If you have over, and you can correct me here when I'm wrong, over 30 acres within the subdivision boundary, you received an invitation, or any of the property owners within our urban area received a letter to be invited to the conversation. And so, rumors start about what it is we're doing. I think Sam got a phone call that the city was going to buy up their property, and so they needed to come to this meeting. And sometimes that bad press is good, because then people actually show up to the conversation.
I guess it was just a bunch of old farmers telling you, you're not gonna take my land over my dead body.
More or less, it was, yeah. But we did, but there was a conversation as part of it. Somebody said, well, why does the city need to grow? And in response, somebody said, well, why not? So it was, some interesting conversation. I think a lot of questions stemmed back to past history, and things that, wasn't a part of, Amy hasn't been a part of. And so, those, it's hard to, those sores sometimes get a scar, and, they stay for a while. And so I think we kind of took the approach with this group that it was more of an educational presentation versus the facilitated questions, but there was some good input that was received through the conversation piece. And then we did have some activities out here that weren't as well participated as maybe they would have otherwise, but there was a lot of conversation happening there. We wanted to give you a heads up. We did let them know that there are steering committees for each of these processes. We let them know that the Plan Commission is the steering committee for the comprehensive plan, and there were requests for who is the Plan Commission. So just to give you a heads up, that.
Refcity.org.
Yeah.
All listening.
Yeah, so, but of course, we let them, obviously from a staff perspective, that we are here and available. But then there were also some ideas thrown out for how we can continue to engage with that group. as well. So all in all, good conversation, but yeah.
So you were with us almost all day.
Yeah.
What'd you think?
I liked the inclusion one. Those were very thoughtful people. I thought the grow to share, which I love, were a bit overboard. You know, I'm like, oh, after about the 10th time, they say something's like, I think you've said that 9 times now and just in different ways, but they're all such sweet people. I mean, they're really nice. And they showed up, right? So, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I was shocked when and you were being kind when those 2 men, why can't we grow? Well, because I own a 130-acre farm. Well, blah, blah, blah. And Stephanie finally goes, are there any other questions? Let's not carry on. No, it was good. It was really, I mean, I wouldn't have come to if I thought, well, this is a waste of time. I was disappointed in the recreation when only 3 people showed up. That, you know, I'm glad you let the people in the audience join the group, because if those just talked, all we would have heard about was the Grow to Share Garden. But no, it was, I just wish that, of course, being on park board, I was hoping to hear a lot of ideas. Yeah, but there was a lot of good ideas.
And being a former member of the Grow to Share board, and I still connect with them
Yeah.
to do their technology online stuff. But yeah, it's very, very ambitious. So, and I think, you know, and this is just a sidebar little thing, is I think they have a lot of expectations from parks and from the city to contribute to things that might be beyond their you know, it's the limit of expectations needs to be curbed, I think, a little bit. And but that's because it's an organization with a lot of ambition.
And they're all volunteers.
And yeah, so.
Yeah, I think when we did kind of talk, we did ask people to RSVP, so we kind of knew it might be lighter attendance about, you know, what some additional options we might have. We do recognize, especially with recreation, that a lot of times you are a volunteer in the organizations that we invited, and so it is harder to, you know, leave work at 9 o'clock and, you know, take.
Rick Cleary would have been great. He's such a good talker about the off-road cyclists, but he also has, has a life.
Yes. So, to that group, those that we invited, will want to be, when we get our survey up and running and some of those things, to make sure that we continue to engage, but we're also talking about if there's other things we need to do there as well.
I guess related to that, and I like the fact that Grow to Share was there, because that is a different type of recreation, and it's, you know, it overlaps other activities. Was there any representation from the disc golf community? And I know there's some things that are going on there, but you just you only had a few people show up for that,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, they were invited.
Okay.
Well, I don't remember, Tolka, I don't know what, remember her name, but she pushed back when we called Grow to Share, you know, more like, you know, not basketball, baseball, and she goes, I invite you to come out and weed these gardens and do this. She said, and then you tell me it's light exercise.
Right, yeah, so.
But then, yeah, we'll have our 2 remaining conversations tomorrow with housing and local businesses, but the intent of those meetings weren't recorded, but we were taking good notes throughout, so we will be developing a summary to share with all of you as well. So did I miss anything? Perfect. So I just jumped ahead. I didn't put things in slides here. So our next agenda item, because I think we had hit on everything from an engagement update, was just an update on our goals. And so we've already worked through this, but we do appreciate the time that you guys put in to give us some thoughts on goals. And we did make some updates to the goals. I don't want to spend a ton of time here because there's still some draft components going on here as well. So we did share some updated statements, the statements that we updated based on your input with the council last week was it last week or 2 weeks ago? Was it last week? Okay, last week. at their workshop, and we did get some feedback on some things that we're still working through a little bit. So I just at a high level wanted to hit here, and feel free to chime in on things as well. I think as we were working through, there was general consensus and agreement with a lot of some of the goal statements. Where we probably had the most discussion was when we got down to this goal here, that River Falls has flexible growth management policies and development standards that promote human scale development and redevelopment that is consistent with community values and supports a strong connection to place. There was some question and comment about what flexible growth management policies, what that means, and kind of the intent. And it was a good question for an understanding how things are interpreted as well. So that opened a conversation about intentional development and being really thoughtful, maybe thoughtful is the better word, about the infrastructure that we're considering as we're looking at development. We brought the conversation then moved to Sterling Ponds and some of, how maybe a little bit of the disconnect to the rest of the community and being kind of thoughtful. So I think there was some thought from council members that that's what the statement was meaning, but that's not necessarily the intent of what we had drafted here. So that's one area that we are looking, and then just looking through a couple of other comments here as well. But I think for the majority, a lot of the changes that were made were kind of some clarifications to things, or switching around or reordering of words and things. The general intent is still very much the same as what we had before. There will be some things in this next iteration that you're going to see as well, some ideas that were brought up that we didn't maybe include or update as a goal statement, but we'll have as part of our priorities for the plan elements, so that there are areas where we get a little bit more specific, where they maybe buddied the goal statement, where we didn't want to pigeonhole us or limit us, but they are definitely something that we want to highlight through a plan element priority as well. And I think the last piece I'll say in kind of the status of what we're working with here as well is still looking at this are there too many goal statements? Are there areas where there's some redundancy that we want to combine as well? We went in with that view as we were reviewing them with the council, and they kind of just kept agreeing with what we had, which was great to see. But that is something as we are working with staff to respond to those comments in the next iteration we will be looking to just see if there is any change we need to do there. So again, the changes haven't been made, but wanted to give you kind of an update on conversation and where we're headed. Before I turn to Amy to see if I missed anything, there were questions asked today at multiple points about, we talked about where we're at in the process, that we're finalizing goals and moving into or already in the plan analysis. And there were requests from people to see those goal statements. And so here in the near term on all three plans, we'll make sure that the goals are updated on the page RF as well. So just another note from that perspective. But did I miss anything from?
I would just add a couple of things. One was a comment and part of the discussion from council on pace of development as well. So that was something that they were thinking about. How fast are we going to move? How fast are we going to grow? The other thing is regarding the goal statements. I think it's important for us to keep telling everybody and for all of you to tell people as you talk to people that the goal statements are drafts, and they're going to remain drafts until we get really close to the end of the plan. So they're not solid. They're not checking that mark that they're done until at the end of the process they're good to go. So.
Any comments, questions on kind of that discussion? Or so just to highlight here too, I think we are, and I'm kind of jumping all over the place a little bit, we're not intending to have a meeting in August. We need a little time to do some work before we engage you again. So as we refine these, the thought would be that we would email them out to you to take a look at, let us know if there's any red flags, but at that point would be kind of where we're solidifying here is our draft here at this point. And then of course, as Amy mentioned, finalizing them at the end of the process when we truthed them and made sure that they're achievable and that we're not setting the bar too low for ourselves as well. So just a kind of an update there. But any comments or questions from the council's perspective? Is there anything?
I think that's pretty much it. And when like Game was talking about pace of development and all that, I think we tried to make it clear that we're not putting any restrictions on development.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just so we're kind of all on the same page.
It's also that we're not just saying yes to.
Right, we're not just saying yes to anything.
Right.
This is where.
This is where flexibility means you can say no.
Right, and this is where our development team does a great job. They don't bring us crap product.
Perfect. So then that moves us into our land use discussion. And there are some updates that need to be made here, which is why I left this in draft form here too. We've been working with staff to refine, but wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up on where we're sitting from a residential category, or not residential, land use categories holistically. When we think about what we'll have for a future land use plan, which is a core component of the comprehensive plan, it's really getting back to why we have a comprehensive plan, but we need to have categories in place that are going to, be that land use that we are guiding. And as we started this process, we're looking as you're familiar with our current future land use plan, there are quite a few categories in here that for the most part directly connect to one zoning district. And so as we were looking at that, we had some discussion about a little bit more flexibility and kind of some of those connections to allow, some flexibility in there to have, the ability to respond to needs, to characteristics and some of those things as well. So I'll just hit at a pretty high level here, but at where we're sitting in kind of the category perspective, we've solidified what our categories are. There's some changes that need to be made to this document that we've talked about from a description standpoint. But from a residential category perspective, we've really looked at establishing 3 categories. And that's a big change from the, I think, 5 or so that we have. Not a big change, but a little bit of a change, especially on the low end of density from our current future land use plan. And so really it's in that same vein of a low and a medium and a high residential density categories, and looking at a split of anything at 6 units per acre or less falls into that low density category. And so again, this is probably the biggest example where there are multiple we've got 2 zoning districts right now that establish that would fall under that land use category. So it again gives us a little bit more flexibility when it comes to how this translates into zoning. And then our medium density residential category puts us at that 6 to 12 units per acre, with the intent being that this is really giving you, this is our missing middle of housing where we're able to put a lot of different typologies. You can have single family homes that would be within that density category. You could also have some smaller apartments that are going to get you at that 6 to 12 units per acre as well. So there's a lot of variety that can happen in that density range as well. And then our high density residential is that 12 units per acre or greater. The one change, if you're really familiar with the descriptions of our current categories, is we are capped at 12 units per acre in the existing high density category within the current comprehensive plan. So that is a little bit of a transition to, and from a land use planning perspective, obviously zoning is what truly regulates what the density would be that's achieved. So there would be that potential cap associated from a zoning district perspective, but from a planning perspective, we've opened it to allow those district changes to be what they need to be and have that be at an ordinance level versus a cap at a comprehensive planning level as well. And I'm just going to keep going unless you have questions. I'll just keep going through here in terms of what we're thinking. And then we have our other categories from our kind of our commercial, industrial, and other in general. Here again, we had an effort of trying to be a little bit more general in our category descriptions and allowing that the more specificity to come in at the zoning district or from the zoning perspective, where we had 4 commercial categories in the current planning process, grouping them all into one commercial land use category that really is aligning with that true definition of, you know, retail sales and service is essentially where we're at from a commercial standpoint. Here's again that example where 3 of our existing zoning districts would align with that land use category. And then we do have a corporate park land use category that is kind of fills us in the space between commercial and industrial, but that is really meant to align with the corporate park development that we have within the community and potential for more corporate park development. But you'll see on those compatible zoning districts, as we were looking at outlining things, we get the commercial and industrial mix in there as well. And then we have the industrial category as well, our 2 industrial zoning districts, but really that true manufacturing warehouse use is a little different than that corporate park as well. And then we have our public and institutional, which is our government-owned facilities. The one change that you should see under this will include UWRF and the community college. Our public institutions, our schools will show up as public institutional, city hall is public institutional, those types of uses. And then we will have our park and parks categories. It's pretty self-explanatory, and open space or that equivalent of conservancy to really highlight those 2 open space areas in the community as well. And then this is areas where I apologize, I didn't get it updated, but we will be looking at, or we will be having a mixed use land use category as well. That's going to be used in a couple of different ways. We went through and working with staff about, there's lots of different ways that we could set up discussions of mixed use. We could have a specific, you know, Main Street category. We talked about mixed use as it relates to the university and, you know, trying to spur some horizontal mixed use where we've got some, you know, higher density residential next to a coffee shop and some of those things. And then just some otherwise general horizontal mixed use. And so what our approach is that we're going to have one mixed use land use category that primarily will look generally at horizontal mixed use, where we have, you know, you might have a commercial building next to some residential, but there could also be, you know, that vertical mixed use as well as part of that.
Okay, so why are you not talking about vertical mixed use?
Yeah, and the one piece where we want to make sure, if you look at Second, for example, you know, we're technically in our, what we have as our downtown area, but the character of the development is different. So we wanted to make sure that mixed use not only included vertical, because that is a different model and sometimes people aren't as interested, but that horizontal is also at play from that perspective. The one caveat with this is that we will have a specific historic Main Street, historic downtown kind of overlay or consideration that's built within this district. So we don't have multiple that we have to deal with. We just have this one boundary that is specific to Main Street, where we are looking to maintain the character that is there today. So we're looking at that vertical mixed use as that form for Main Street versus the horizontal. So narrowing that specific area in a little bit. I think the interesting part with this is that there will be some opportunity to build flexibility in figuring out what this is, because the intent, we see this as being a category that could be in a lot of different areas in the city as well. It's not just downtown. We see it by the university. We see it extending north on Main Street, when we're talking about some of the redevelopment areas that Chris was mentioning, that there is maybe some opportunity for that mixed use to be incorporated in those areas, or even looking at different development forms in other areas too. So the thing, we spent a lot of time noodling on what our options were for how we wanted to manage mixed use, but we think this is a great kind of intro in some ways to giving us those options, and that could be amendable. But the other nice part about it too, when it comes to zoning districts down the road as well, those are gonna provide that additional level of detail. You know, that gets built in when we talk about potential performance standards and some of those things, but keeps us at that one base district. And so maybe with that in that description, Emily, did I miss anything? Okay. You guys are too nice to me.
Carol.
But, so that is essentially where we're at in terms of what we're thinking from a category standpoint. We'll send this update out with the, zoning or the goals, as well, so you can have an update. But any comments, questions, reactions to how we're looking to set up just our base category?
I think this is a lot more understandable, and putting people in one, or an area into one place or another makes it a lot easier than all the different ones we had before.
And it says there does not include the university.
That's an error, we've changed that, because there was a discussion of creating a specific university mixed use category, so under that, the public institutional would have included, but, so that should go away.
This might be kind of, but, you know, we consider certain development, how close it is to parkland, and so we see that on the map, and we would consider, okay, there's adjacent parkland, and I think it's interesting, though, a lot of our public schools are recreation centers. They're also parks. The university is like, you look at it, and I use it as probably the most frequent park I visit, but it's considered in the blue category.
Yes.
And so I don't know if, you know, when we get down to doing certain, you know, policy and planning, and if those kind of things should be considered, or if public institution's property is so big, part of it is designated as, but you know, that could muddy the waters and make it confusing, but it's just something to consider, because it's kind of deceiving a little bit when you say park, and then you look at the acreage that the university has, and how often people use it to travel through it and hike it and all of that too, so.
Think about the grade schools, you know, the kids use those as their park, where that is.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, promise.
If you look at the map, it's, you know, because, you know, the older part of town doesn't have those neighborhood parks.
Because they have the old junior high and,
Yeah.
you know, so.
Yeah, so
But you've got, so the school grounds taking place.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think it's a great point, Mike. I think the one piece from a land use planning perspective is that connection to zoning, because you wouldn't zone a school park like that park land use category is associated with it. So that's really where kind of that
Okay.
structure comes from, and why. So, but I, you know, understand your point. And I think to that accord, if we get down the road and we want to throw a icon on to show where those schools are, so that you differentiate a school site versus, you know, the water treatment facility or city hall, so that you understand that use a little bit differently, you know, could also be something to make sure that people can connect from that side of things too.
Well, the other piece is the outdoor rec plan.
Yeah.
Did take into consideration schools and UWRF and inventory facilities that are available to the community. I think they were weighted a little differently, because city facilities are typically accessible to everyone all the time. I mean, the pool has hours and that kind of thing. But UWRF, you may have to have a community membership to get to some of their athletic facilities, but there's a lot of stuff there that the city doesn't provide, but is available to the community. And so wanting to take that into consideration when we're looking at park facilities that are needed for the city.
And part of our analysis that will come as part of the outdoor rec plan as well will be kind of that service area. We, you know, a half mile is our typical walking distance, so we're gonna be doing some buffer analysis, not only from a park perspective, but also when we're looking at hey, our assessment says we need to have another softball field. Let's run an assessment of actually that area and people's connections to think about where that could be located as well. So that's, some of that will happen outside of the future land use plan as well, but will inform that. I think the one piece that I would just add to some of that I think can be hard, particularly with public and institutional and the park categories, and from a future land use plan perspective, typically it's, we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves unless we know that the school district has purchased a property for their next elementary school. We're probably not going to put a lot of future public and institutional land because we don't want to pigeonhole the school district into something, and, you know, property owner sees that they are blue on the future land use plan and they're not going to sell to the school district because they know what they have now. And so we are very thoughtful about that. And so that's the hard part with the park and public institutional. A lot of times we won't see new areas designated as those because there's some flexibility in how they actually come forward. So Amy and I were talking last week, this week, I can't remember, but about making sure that we're connecting with the school district as well. So we can, you know, this is a 20-year plan, you know, what are the school needs going to be as well, and making sure that we're factoring that into consideration. Okay. Greta, you might have to do the facilitate the conversations tomorrow. I'm sure I don't have a voice. Okay, so that was really kind of the process of where we're at. Now we kind of want to turn it over to the homework exercise that we had you all working on. And so we as staff went through the exercise and kind of looked at it in a couple different ways, but we want to facilitate a conversation now to understand from your perspectives when you're looking at land use, where did you see growth? Where did you define that growth boundary? And of course, we asked you to really look at outward growth from that perspective and what you were seeing and laying out. And so we wanted to just have a discussion here and kind of understand where people were going from that perspective. We did have an interesting activity with the council last week, where we asked that we gave them 3 dots and said where you've got 3, you can pick priority areas for 3 areas to grow, and then we gave them 1 dot that meant an area for where they didn't want to see growth, so they got to do that individually. And then they came back and we asked them to put 1 dot their top priority area of where they'd like to see growth as well. So that was a little interesting exercise.
How much similarities were there, or how many similarities were there across what are there, 7 council board members?
Yeah. There was only 1 similarity because it was a large area. Was the 1 similarity. So 2 people identified here. The only area that was really highlighted that's within city limits was Man Valley, was the 1 area that was identified within city limits. Otherwise, they were pretty tightly knit around the southern. Everything was southern. Part. So yeah, so interesting from that perspective as well. Of course, that doesn't summarize up there. There are 3 dots as well. But I think, you know, now we want, hopefully you were able to do, was everybody able to do the homework? Did you have any questions about what we were asking you to do?
Well, you did ask us to do outside the city limits, right? So Man Valley's wouldn't have been an option.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm like, did I just screw
Yes,
this up?
no, we were trying to make it easy and not
Okay.
overwhelming.
Okay.
Because I will admit we had a longer exercise that we had initially put together and gave to staff. And we sat down to go over it and they were like, but this and this and this and this. So when we went through that exercise, we tried to kind of simplify a little bit for what we were going to discuss with you. So focus on that outward growth versus looking at infill as well. So, yeah, but did anybody have, so hopefully it wasn't that But we also want to recognize, and Tricia and I talked about it earlier today as well, that there are factors that come into play. There's who owns the property, what their long-term desire is going to be, what the,
Kitty River Land Trust has in trust, yeah.
environmental features, steep slopes in our blufflands, and, how those things show up in here as well. We recognize that there's those different factors that maybe you didn't think of, or, if you look at the areas, you can see things differently than the map that we have here, but, any other comments or reactions to having done it? Did everybody get a chance to at least think about it?
There's one that's just, part of what I see is, and it's just imagining it whenever I go east on 29 and I see it's the Glen Meadow Street that's, it's to the east of the golf course, and I'm thinking, at what point does that eventually get connected to 29? And there's infill of development there, and then what is the future of the golf course? I've heard different rumors over the months and years, but does that, factor in some things if that turns into a sale or something like that? And so I see, as far as residential growth, it seems like that's, or I could see logically that starts happening there. You look across that field on 29 and you see that neighborhood and you're thinking it'd be kind of, even on a bicycle, it'd be nice to have a circuit just going through there. But, and I'm thinking, is that a possibility?
Sure.
Anything's possible.
Yes.
You heard it here first. Perfect. So my thought in kind of having you all, if you would be willing to, if you have notes that you'd be willing to share with us too, we'd appreciate, to take them away. But that through a facilitated conversation, we want to talk about. So my thought is that we ask you first to identify kind of that boundary that we would be looking at. So my thought is that we would kind of work circularly around the community and have a discussion about some of those different areas that you had identified. And then we can come back and talk about land uses. And we do recognize, and it was intentional, that we had you look at general land use categories versus the different categories that we just walked through, that we actually just residential, not low, medium, and high density. That's detail that we'll work through as well. But does that sound like an okay way of moving through here? So before we jump in, because I stood up and I've been drinking a lot of caffeine today, I'm going to take a quick pause. Go use the restroom quick. So we'll have a quick break here and then we'll come back. So be thinking about your areas and I'll be back.
Three is usually you did three, right? Or you did four? Four is, three is the limit.
So how was the cookout? I mean, I know you were only there for a little bit. And this one was at the St. Louis?
Yeah.
Good.
It was fine.
Did you have people show up?
Yeah.
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 I was at a political event where Jeff Smith and the governor was there.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, the governor was there. That was nice to see.
He's running for Senate, right?
Yes, Jeff Smith is currently the senator in the 93rd, which is like Southern Division.
Well, you didn't miss it.
I did, well, I missed your hot.
Yeah. I give it, I don't cook it. They won't let me cook it.
So the hot dogs are better this year.
Yes. Mr. Stifter has become the head chef. He took the pie out of my hand. Says there's not that many people that like burnt hot dogs.
Kristen,
I
okay.
just, I start cooking them and then I start talking. I forget all about it.
Did you like burnt marshmallows too?
No, I like burnt hot dogs.
That's burnt on one side, right?
Yeah, but it's good.
So cold on the other.
You flip that down in the butt.
Mike makes beautiful hot dogs, beautiful grill marks. Best hot dog chef you got.
Oh, dear. Somebody separate that. So there's somebody separate.
Oh,
I think that. This is right out.
yeah. And it doesn't matter to me, I mean, I'll eat the cheapest hot dog you got, it doesn't matter.
I guess it's not surprising.
Sound like my 1.5 year old, one of his first words, it was tractor, truck, and then hot dog.
Oh, that's okay. That's a great example, right? Yep, my oldest, her first word was cheese.
Proper Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin, yeah.
He does know his tractor is also green, so
I'm sure you're not very good.
I know that's, yeah,
So,
maybe not everyone agrees with green tractor, but anyway. Okay, so let's jump into things here. I think I think we could start with the Kinnickinnick, town because of the urban reserve area. I think that kind of helps to solidify things a little bit, but did anybody have any thoughts or changes or, looking into the urban area a little bit differently in terms of where they had established their boundary in this quarter of the,
Well, we're kind of waiting for, if I understand right, the Hanson farm is in the Hansons, and Miss Hanson is really old. And it's right next to Hoffman Park. So we're kind of, when you're looking at that map, there's a little corner,
the tiny corner.
tiny corner that, to be added to the park. But then I was thinking, I think we need industrial because industrial are jobs. Not just an office park where you might have 5 people in an office, I mean factory work. Because then that brings in people who will stay here, live here, and then maybe we'll get a dress shop someday. I don't know. But, so I was,
More dress jobs.
I go to Lake Geneva, it's really fun. So I put industrial, in this square here. Cause I've gone through I've looked at the property and it's kind of like, I don't know if we get much feedback about putting something there. So that, anyway, that was mine.
and I think, Mike, before we jump into specific development types too, when you're thinking about our 20-year vision and where we might have that growth boundary be, I'm assuming you use the entirety of the urban reserve area, was where you were thinking that growth. Is that kind of,
Yeah,
okay, does that make sense of what I'm trying to ask there?
If I can jump in.
Yeah.
I don't see industrial there. I see industrial kind of more closer to the highway.
Sure.
You're closer to the highways, easier access to twin cities. And, I don't know, I think there's some, if we're talking Kinnickinnick, we've got some housing out there up above the hospital. You could easily, continue with some of it. And that's like fairly, dense neighborhood, you just drive that, get a sidewalk to down to Huffman Park and connects with the rest of the city. So.
Okay.
I don't know. So I think you could do a number of different things there.
Sure.
But yeah, to do like a factory out there, you need bigger roads, you'd need, to extend the sewer and water, you need, it's.
Yeah.
That kind of growth, I just think it's easier
I
elsewhere.
know.
Did anybody think or have any other thoughts about specifically that urban reserve area and how, from thinking from a growth boundary perspective?
You know me, I growth everywhere. No, but I like what Diane was saying, because that's where we do have the boundary agreement is out with Kinnickinnick.
Yeah,
Right.
So we have that all figured out. That's not,
Right. And
that's
part-
not a pain in the butt.
Yeah, and part of my thought is like having participated in that process and knowing, okay, they've all got these, it was one of the things that was a concern to the people who have property there is, okay, we don't want to be really crowded yet, so how does it get divided and, when do we when do we get it next into it? And the talk was more about, residential.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that chunk right there can really absorb a lot. I mean, that's a big chunk of land if you look at it in comparison with the existing city limits. I mean, you could basically fit everyone that could potentially move into River Falls in the next 20 years, not even in that whole space. So, I mean, I think if we're going to concentrate on a particular area, that's as good as any.
Sure.
Because the more we can constrain, the less we're going to spend on water lines, wastewater lines, and all that stuff. So.
I think part of what we talked about at the council last week was, like, kind of like you pointed out, is trying not to spread it out, going too far, trying to keep it more compact around areas where there's already growth.
Yeah, we talked about, maybe being aware of distance to the center. I mean, I don't know if you count like Veterans Park or something, but how far are you from what people, kind of like the beating heart of River Falls?
Right.
And you can get good access from there into downtown, to the university, to Hoffman Park, to, if you
To the
go
bypass too.
farther north, you run the issue you see with the development there that feels separated from the city. So the more residential we push north, the more we're going to kind of end up with two towns or two.
Right.
Unless you can somehow bridge them.
Well, and when you do that, I mean, think about it, when everybody lives on west, the golf course, whatnot, you have to drive downtown to get Harbor Mountain.
Right.
Whatever. So Quick Trip is now there. So if you're looking at that whole piece, if you don't figure into your residential, how to get
Something.
something to keep them from going that way instead of, trying to provide for the, support the community.
Yeah, I think every residential neighborhood should have, a little retail center. Like, I mean, that, like our, what's what we're, I think the point of
Sterling
what we're
Ponds
trying to
doesn't
do.
want one.
What's that?
Sterling Ponds does not want.
No, well, yeah, but I think you could probably find a different location in Sterling Ponds that would probably work or something like that, but the idea of the traditional neighborhood development was to allow for just that, right?
Exactly.
And the idea of not having to go to all the way to Family Fresh or Aldi's or whatever. So the more we can, and there, again, there's plenty of space there to do all sorts of stuff.
But that's kind of the game you gotta kind of play too, especially with Sterling Ponds. Do you want to start putting a bunch of retail out there? You still want them to come into town. I mean, I know what you mean, you want to be able to, you don't have to drive 5 miles to get a gallon of milk, but there's kind of that.
But if it's closer to get to huts that are easier than having.
Right.
For sure.
That's what I'm thinking.
No, right.
What,
Right.
to be able to retain them.
And there's only so much you're gonna pull people downtown to. I mean, when you got a community like ours that commutes so much, they all go past 14 different big box stores, they all go past 14 different huge grocery stores. Everybody's on that, there's only so much you can do, but yeah, I like the ideas about that.
Quick Trip has the cheapest produce in town.
Yeah.
And I think one, yes, there's a lot of land area to look at, but when we're thinking about that intentional development perspective as well, I wanted to highlight, Scott, I should just pull up the recording from the council workshop. We didn't record it. And just the kind of how the current future land use plan and current comprehensive plan has in that exercise of putting your 3 dots of where development occurs. Could occur, would you like to see it? Really, there are many options because of the good implementation of that policy and direction that have left us with that opportunity. And so making sure that we're not losing sight of how that phasing occurs or that those connections in as well. Obviously, it's great to have that entire area to be looking at, but thinking very intentionally about how those connect, how that connects back and how that gets phased through things as well. So
I guess one of the things that I'm considering a lot when I'm coming back into town from being out of town is that Troy Township area between the boundary, well, and then and Glover and in that area, and we can have ideas about what we would like, but you could have something come along that's, years ago, we were talking about big box stores, and now Amazon has really kind of dented that market. And so you maybe have an Amazon type thing in the future where we have a distribution center there, and we're gonna hire 400 people. And it's right on the highway, we like it, and, what canvas do we have there? In our idea, so I look at these zoning areas as what kind of canvas it is for what kind of painting, for the lack of a better analogy. And so we're trying to say when we would want that, but then the market comes in and says, then what are we doing? And then we're saying, we had this idea for this space, but now.
That's the flexible growth.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right. And so I look at, and it kind of goes back to what I think Diane was talking about as far as, it would seem to me certain kind of industry just wants to be on the highway, and particularly even maybe that far outside the city, so they're not coming through the city, and so I see that as, for what it's worth, for this conversation, that's kind of one of the things I'm looking at.
Yeah, and I think, with their, some of the discussion that was happening around some of the potential annexation up on the north side too, thinking about that community benefit and that connection there, as well as something from a policy level that we want to be thinking about when we're thinking about where those land uses go as well. How is it connected back into the community? Can people, from a sustainable or smart growth development perspective, is it easy to get, even from an employment standpoint, when you think about some of those industrial uses, a lot of times those are, maybe people that are, it's not an office job where you've got a higher salary and you can have a, 4 cars for your family and things like that. So just those different connection components there as well, and still make, the desire to maintain and be a member of the River Falls community and making sure that we're maintaining that connection as well.
Well, the idea for Min Valley is like a corporate park, right?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what that's supposed to be? So again, that's gonna absorb a lot of potential business development. So, I mean, it seems like we've got a couple big sponges to absorb a lot of what potentially is coming, so. I don't know. Again, goes back to my theory, we should focus on redevelopment,
Yes.
not new development, but because we've got, again, places for a lot of this big things to go.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, maybe let's transition down into River Falls Township and, the area surrounding. Again, we have, some different boundaries here at play, but what were some of the growth areas and just kind of the area that you had identified through the exercise? Were there any areas that stuck out that really should be those focus areas for us from your perspective?
It's not really unique outside city limits, but again, I think y'all mentioned it, the east side of Wasson Lane. I think Lisa, you mentioned it, the east side of Wasson Lane between Cascade and Cemetery was.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Sorry, Diane mentioned it.
Yeah.
Across from the campus farm, there's a few kind of multifamily like buildings there, and then there's some horse farms and stuff on that side as well. But again, that's a pretty large area. It's relatively flat. You probably have some floodplain issues with the South Fork, but there's a lot of property there that could, take a lot. And you've already got Wasson Lane right there. You've got a highway. So I think that could be, potentially a commercial center for some of those maybe more intensive commercial uses,
Sure.
not like your, shops, cafes, but, maybe some of the like auto parts stores or, things like that are those bigger, more intensive uses that you wouldn't necessarily want, like in downtown, those types of things.
Something that needs a parking lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So just make sure I'm highlighting from your perspective where.
Yeah, so just kind of this whole area of Wasson between is the cemetery, right? Yeah, this area, which you've got that big chunk of floodplain, but still there's some space there to do some stuff.
There's a little, we've got wetland.
Oh, there's wetland in there?
Yeah.
The worst land is what?
Yeah, it is, you're right, because I walked there, it is pretty
Yep.
low.
Yep, so
And,
just for the houses, right, the trailer park is
yeah,
highland.
Any other areas that anyone had identified? We obviously have the big barrier there with 35 is.
Yeah.
You know, crossing that is a big.
Yeah, but yeah, further down 35, like toward Ellsworth. Yeah, there's some room for redevelopment of some of those commercial buildings that have outlived their lifespan.
Any other areas to identify? Falls Township.
There's that up at Montessori School. That's kind of like this little tag of, well, I mean, and you know, and all the little township enclaves that are kind of stuck in some River Falls. I mean, I find it kind of irritating. You know, it's like some of that stuff, you know, you could kind of do some infill and you know, expand a little bit into the existing neighborhood.
Okay, well, maybe we'll keep moving in our circle here and go to Clifton. Any areas that had been, you're thinking about identifying it there?
When you were talking about where Johnson, correct?
Big Johnson farm is, I think Johnson's, yeah, Clifton, Johnson's right, Clifton.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's all in the land trust.
So I have to look at where that is.
Oh, that's because you're not.
Yeah. it's gonna be the number plus.
It's just a tough area.
Johnson's right. So then it's not just the Kinnick,
Yeah.
it's this. whole-
Johnson's are over in Powell.
Yeah,
Okay.
We're talking about different Johnsons, I think.
yeah, Lyle and Roberta. Yeah, in that area.
LP and Bird, actually, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right along Powell there.
South of Powell. Yeah, that you have to go down 960th or,
Not Beer Can Alley, what was
No,
the
no.
deal road? Oh,
not,
You can.
it's south.
Runs right along.
It's paved now, but it didn't used to be.
Yeah.
You're talking south, you're talking west of this treatment plant.
Yes, it is west of the treatment plant.
It's a town river hall, yeah.
Yeah, you've got it, Mark. That's right.
Was that like make out point or whatever?
You used to have huge trees that kind of made an alley and it was really dark to go, and then they cut all the trees, like, what? What are you doing?
We can't go make out anymore.
I still can't picture the Johnson. Why can't I picture the Johnson property?
Beer Can Alley, take a left.
Yep.
Catfish's, Tommy Johnson's were there, the Myers were there, and then come back this way to LP and Bird's. And the road ended.
Yeah, it's a dead end.
Oh, back in there.
Yeah.
Back behind. It's actually like this, the south of, what's that
The
development there? Yeah.
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 Grandpa Johnson sold
Yes.
West Side School, their land.
Yeah.
It goes, yeah.
So that
Okay.
all butts up to it, and that's all in conservancy. So that's kind of.
So we had that discussion from the utility perspective. Don't think this stuff's easy to serve. Sewer perspective.
Just
Right.
So we've had talks about probably not a whole lot happening over here. But not. Can't. We haven't sat down with the city engineer recently to. have that
Yeah,
discussion.
I kind of look at some of those places out, like Clifton, or even they get developed, it's developed within that township, and it looks, if it's residential, it's probably gonna look like what we're seeing between here and Hudson. That's going on right now, and that's what you're gonna kind of have, and I don't know what kind of influence, you know, the city has on. on that.
The only influence we have right now is the subdivision boundary. Because that is limiting development in those areas. The piece that I wonder about is development one. So right now, up to a subdivision boundary, you know, you're not allowed to develop one. Yeah. Good.
So what happens in a situation where it's somebody does want to develop there, we're saying no, but if you did, we could get you, it's kind of a catch-22, you'd have to be on city services, but it's not cost effective for us to do it, right? I mean, because that's what.
It's in the subdivision boundaries. It's 5 acres.
And what's the part there? I mean, is it that buildable for remote area? Isn't that where you're trying to get build anywhere?
It is.
And I think there's enough developable space. I can't see a lot of pressure on the hard to build places. I mean, when you've got, 100 acres of farmland you can go buy and build on that's flat and drained already, why are you gonna go build on a cliffside? Like, I think we're gonna see, just from an ease of development perspective, the pressure is gonna be on the ends, not the river bluffs in that area.
So let's go straight west and we'll annex all of Troy Township in.
Good luck with that. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
That's an expensive way to do business.
Because it's hard at That's why we have insurance.
That 20-year plan you're talking about, that get it all settled by then.
Yeah. People die.
Well, yeah, maybe let's move into Troy, but talk more specifically. Just the whole.
Yeah, it's just backing up about Clifton. It really seems like the Kinney is kind of a hard boundary down there for, growth to the west. We don't have so I can't see us, at the moment, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to look at it,
I agree. Yeah. Gain us anything.
So I don't know if you remember, but when we redid the actual map last with Rita's.
That was
We were, yeah, we were
That's
just
what we were
talking
talking about. She was there too.
Yeah, so, the official map used to show that. Exactly, but we've got a road coming around here.
Yeah.
Right?
The
And
29 thing.
it had, it was slated to come up here,
Mhm.
but we took it off.
We
the
took it
last
off because it was a matter of
because
bridging
this
over the
bridge
Kinney.
over Kennedy.
Right.
Kennedy is
Yeah, not feasible.
expensive. You know,
But that was something that would take us from 29, it would be south of 29. So it was almost more Highway 10, coming a connection so that it would be Cemetery Road. It was something to connect, so we didn't have to use Cemetery Road. So that still needs to happen anyways. Cemetery Road is a main thoroughfare now with a high school and a lot of dwellings and
And who wants a high school and cemetery?
They talked about changing the name.
Cemetery reservoirs.
I know
But
it's
what I'm saying is,
cemetery there.
it just, southern route around the city is inevitable. Where is that gonna end up too?
but if this we think isn't feasible, then all of this has to be served from. Which is a lot of way to push.
Are you just talking common sense?
Stop.
So.
Back to the east we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think
And the west.
it makes sense to go east. It's uphill from the wastewater.
Well, anything else in Clifton, or do we jump to
Let's jump to Troy.
Troy? Okay. Other than dance the entirety of the township.
It's all flat farmland, like Chris said. I mean, it's the easiest way to go.
Yeah.
It is, it's much more buildable.
Yeah, it's easy for infrastructure, it's easy for everything, roads, whatever you need.
The Carney Golf Course, I've heard will be going up for sale. And it's outside of River Falls boundaries, but that would be a perfect place to put houses because it's already ground,
Right,
lots of trees.
right, yeah, and I think that's what they're thinking of, and it's actually just north of there that we annexed and zoned.
Yeah.
You know, they want to put housing there, which would kind of, if that happens, that housing and then down to like maybe some less dense housing.
And all
I mean,
these to radio road.
Yeah, yeah, all of
Yeah.
the radio, yeah.
Yeah.
Right where Paulson meets radio, there's some really, some really property.
Large chances of that.
Yeah. So yeah, I see, yeah, some housing possibilities there.
Even right, the Johnson Farm on Powell Avenue, just before you get to Radio Road.
Yeah.
That's all, I mean, that's all great, easy, buildable.
North of the site.
Right there, huh?
North of the site. She's like, what's John?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry.
It's okay.
Just all that.
There's a lot of areas, so yeah. Everyone Johnson's here today. so-
Uh-huh.
Well, yeah, essentially, you know, if you go down to that, Radio Road, it's like, and then all of that, you know, some of that's bluff, you know, to the east of it, but, you know, there's a lot of space for development.
So we're kind of looking, just to make sure I'm getting my bearings correctly, we're kind of looking at two areas right in here and then up in,
Yeah, and connected.
yeah.
Mhm.
So would it be safe to say that we're kind of looking within our green on the map that was provided?
Yeah.
Maybe that edge of the
Yeah.
limit is our urban area boundary, is kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, that bump out is the lab farm.
Yes, I believe so.
Mhm.
You got enough for like a whole nother River Falls right here.
Yeah.
There's plenty of space.
We're lucky that one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm working down in Ellsworth and they've got the same, and their city limits has tons of space within the existing city limits it's ag to build up.
Yeah.
You don't have to fight with the town for the annexation. You're in good shape.
Any areas that we missed that we talked about?
Well, I think what Tricia had mentioned earlier, the area south of the golf course, the golf course, where Oaks, that space potentially.
Yeah, there. Yeah, I could see extending, and then there's the whole Audubon thing, but just setting that aside, you know, because when you're on, you drive past Moody's and you're headed for, you know, Valley, you know, you could see the housing development there. I think it would make sense to just like kind of keep extending it.
900th
Yeah,
Street.
yeah.
Connects right straight
Yeah.
across over to Liberty.
Yeah,
It's literally what,
Yeah,
I mean, it just, that would fix Mike's bike path and that would.
Right, and then
give
it would
the
make
Liberty
kind of, that
residents-
would kind of, you know, make a circle, like, you know, up past the hospital, like through all that housing development and then kind of back down to what becomes Cascade.
Well, the one development is off of Liberty.
Yeah.
Is, it's many houses and only one in and out.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just, I know how the fire department cares, you know, feels about that, but.
Yeah.
That's just unfortunate.
So are we thinking it's, just to make sure I'm getting my bearings, is kind of the entirety of this area? Like,
Some of it's
Yeah.
bluff,
And some of it,
but you see the little round circle blob? Here. So it's down here. Yeah.
Okay.
Right there in particular. Yeah, probably do this, but some of this is up.
Sure.
I don't think we can count on getting that Hanson property.
20 years.
The kids are pretty,
Kids pretty gonna know about it.
um,
Siri and Paul are Well, which would be great, because we go straight across the. It's gonna be tough.
Perfect. Well, then we can transition to kind of be thinking about, we've talked a little bit about, this area here, but any other, when you were thinking of land use categories, more of the different growth is occurring, staff are talking about, okay, we have Van Valley, once Van Valley is developed, where is our next corporate park if, the
That's-
market,
That's gonna be more than 20 years from now, I imagine.
yeah.
Like, leave that to the grandkids.
But anything, and maybe obviously it's residential is our, and I haven't run the percentages from an existing land use perspective, but obviously a majority of our land uses fall within that residential category in terms of built environment, but thinking about maybe more on that commercial or industrial side and where those areas, excuse me, areas Patricia talked about, in our urban reserve area, but were there any other than just residential, where you have some of that commercial or industrial?
Along 35, that, I don't know what that frontage road is called anymore, we're H and F and,
Yeah,
is that Beerstead Lane now, or what is that called? I don't know what it's called anymore. That whole, I mean, from the corner all the way down,
Yeah.
that'd be great for commercial.
Yeah.
That whole, yeah. I've had my eye on that for years and years and years.
Well, we've got the old.
Yeah, I know.
I think it's North Frontage Road.
Oh, no, really.
It's not 35 because we did nail up there.
So, we still think that.
Yeah.
Oh, right in that left. Yeah, where the furniture shop is. Yeah.
The actual ones, the old press dealership.
I can't think of her name. The one he died years ago, and she's in the process of trying to work with, antique dealers for all the cars in there. Cause full of Mustangs, I think it's Mustangs,
How was that?
or Corvettes, yes.
Yes, that.
So,
Karen,
I can't remember her last name.
I want to say Bob Miller.
it's Karen Miller.
Thank you.
No,
Bob
So
Miller.
then you,
All right, so they still have it, but they're
Yes.
trying to,
She's trying
I mean,
to,
that just got, I'm sorry, but it's just sat there for so long,
Yeah.
just like that, and. It could be so
great
much.
spot for a big grocery store, something like
It
that.
could be so much. That's the entrance to town again, it's just
Kind of ugly. Just sitting there.
not welcoming, nor attractive,
Anyways,
so
yes.
we got potential,
Yes.
lots and lots.
And that's a kind of big chunk. That's gonna take a lot of
Chunk of land there, too.
big sponge for commercial development.
that whole corridor.
So the hotel and restaurants and things, because you've got all of your industry here
We
and.
use another, hotel.
I'm wondering about the area, like the center around Tattersall now. With Tattersall there as a destination, what's the potential for like the Sears and the haircut shop, whatever's there? For that, is there pressure on them to redevelop, or the property owners there to sell and have it be like a hotel, because you've got, a destination right there with Tattersall, is there? I mean, I know there's the Comfort Suites or whatever the hotel is up there.
I think redevelopment there is great, because there's a couple, like, I know Dave's Transmission's for sale, Sears is closed,
Mhm.
I mean, there's a lot of,
Yeah, I think that's another area.
That's a
And it's right past Tattersall, plenty of property and.
Right,
all of
yeah.
that. And there's just,
Yeah, I think there's
yeah,
a lot
nice
of
little
potential
pocket
there.
of.
Yeah.
Potential.
pockets of potential, I love it. New marketing statement. Pockets of potential.
How about any other commercial or industrial areas that you had identified outside of just residential?
Well, I guess the area I would kind of like on the south side around the gravel plant there. Along 35 or 65 or whatever.
Really?
Oh,
That's
it's
done.
campsite.
Yeah, I think Quarry Road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, across from the new quick trip, that, whatever that is, there's, I mean, that, there's already an industrial user there. And that's on, right on the highway, accessible and so on.
Land available.
Potential.
How about in the reverse side of things here, when we're looking at, we kind of talked a little bit along the Kinney as well, but we do have conservancy as a land use category. And so when we're thinking about more, this wasn't in the exercise, so I apologize. That threw me off, but we're starting to talk about what, could be achievable. When you're thinking about areas that we, from your perspective, shouldn't be touching.
You have conservation open spaces.
Okay.
So
So
big one.
I did, so good, I'm not totally putting you on the spot, but where were those areas identified? Obviously, there's areas that we haven't included as in that growth boundary, but.
I have where you see the two rivers converge on the right-hand side. Yeah, and if you look at and when you look at the aerial view, I mean, it's just trees and two rivers, so you don't want to mess with those. So I thought that would be a good place to conserve property.
Any thoughts or reactions to that?
I would concur.
Yeah, just like all the stuff around, all the rivers, all the tributaries.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many tributaries that go in there and consequently the wetland, the marshes, it's not buildable. Yes, you could fill some of it in, but why?
On the northeast as well.
Why?
I don't think we want to take all the options off the table on there though. Well, I mean, there's plenty of,
Where?
well,
Give me one.
there's
One I can think of. Very small parcel, but just as far as buildable.
anything's possible.
True.
Well, let's, I mean, with the dam removal, what's the potential with that in terms of developable land that comes from, what is now Lake George or what's the other one, Lake
Lake
Louise?
Louise, yeah. Lake Louise is available right now.
That's some great drone footage of that.
I don't know if anybody wanted to develop it.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Well, we have the kitty corner.
Anyway,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, it's gonna be a park.
More nature stuff, I guess. Whatever they do. So let's see how much money.
So are you talking about that when you crossed out the north there?
Professor, tell me.
Isn't that, I mean, not to bring up a full story history, wasn't that Hans Hagen, that the area we want to not deal with that
Oh, no,
again?
that was it.
Yeah,
Was that-
there was
Hans
a
Hagen development pre-housing crisis.
95 probably.
Yeah.
Or 2005 rather.
Where is it?
Oh, it was like out toward, out into Kinney Township. Was it
Okay.
like, this was before Sterling Pond, this was, I think,
Yeah, it's right
This was
where you
like
crossed off
toward-
that area, right?
toward that
Yeah.
landscape.
Oh,
Yeah.
towards earthworks.
Well,
Gotcha.
okay.
Quarry Road.
Quarry Road.
Gotcha, Quarry Road.
Yeah.
So when we say we want to have a buffer, I mean, we don't want to deal with that pushback again, but I don't know, I can't remember all the aspects of that, but I think that's the optics of, you're building right up against the river and then you got the, it's a challenge. But you were saying that you don't want to take all the options.
We want to take, I mean, we're not gonna say nobody can ever build along the river anyway. Obviously, that's not what we say, but I think there's plenty of reasonable options. We have them not right in the middle of town, but as you go out further.
And with the events of 2 years ago, it takes a lot of those out of the equation. The flood.
Oh, yeah.
I think so many of the houses that are built and safe and way,
Right,
so that,
I mean, that's part of what you gotta look at.
exactly, that just.
But when I mean along the river, I don't mean you're here and the river's right here. I mean, you know what I mean? We got all the floodplains and we have all that stuff we have to do.
So that kind of alleviates being
Yes.
right on.
Right.
But I think we can, kind of prioritize the health of the river.
Yes.
We already do.
Yes.
Including that in our land use.
Well, and again, there's enough other places to build.
Yes.
Yes.
So much white space on the back. Let's give Chris a marker.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of a future land use plan too, is you need to have the plan. You could adopt a future land use plan that just put conservancy on everything outside of city. I think there's some people that we met with this afternoon that's what they would like our future land use plan.
Well, that's every town though. I mean, every plan I've ever done, they want to build a wall around the town, charge a toll to get in. And yes, that's everywhere.
But to that point, if somebody wants to come and do something, then we have to go through this planning process that we're now going through. So from my perspective and kind of having you work through this exercise is understanding where maybe our focus areas are and where we're looking at some of our policies and priorities from a land use planning perspective. As we're working through land use, our next phase we're moving into is transportation and utilities. And we start with land use because we want to know where those focus areas are, because we want a truth and make sure, Amy mentioned already, but if tonight's conversation was everything was in Clifton, and then we sit down with the city engineer and he's like, what in the heck? Those are conversations we need to have, but at the same time, we need to be thinking about, though that's maybe Clifton isn't a priority area for us. How do we want to guide growth if somebody was to approach us, what are our thoughts there? So that's where we'll look and as we're looking through things too, of balancing conservancy versus putting other land uses there from a planning perspective, if something were to kind of come up and have a planning perspective as well. So anything else that kind of came up to you as you were working through this homework? Otherwise, this conversation has been very helpful for me. You may not think so with what we have up here, but this has been very helpful and ties us to some of what staff has been working on as well. I think there's maybe some differences and things that we will work through, but it's helpful to understand your perspective and optics. And really what, from an outward growth planning perspective, what we'll look to do is come back with staff and kind of merge those components together and start to refine what that future land use plan is.
And now we're liable in Roberta that.
I'm on my way home. No.
Have y'all done the projections yet? And I can't remember if we've seen them or not, population projections.
Yes.
So we kind of know how many people, and can you refresh my data? I mean, I don't know if it's on top of your head. It's
Yes,
completely not
yeah,
on
no,
top.
I don't have we're at 22 by 2045.
Okay, so that's 7,000, 6,000, 7,000 people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a lot, honestly, in the grand scheme of things. I mean, again, we identified lots of space where we can put on. And that doesn't even count the infill development.
Exactly.
I mean, you've got, how many people are gonna live in the senior center here? The 1300 South Main is 50 apartments, isn't it?
When we have a study,
So,
the revised housing study.
Oh, hoping like October-ish.
And that would be a very interesting piece just to compare it to where we were.
Yeah.
Right now, it's kind of, you know that they will come.
yeah,
It's
Yeah.
nuts.
yeah, I'd be curious with the interest rate out there.
Well, it's gonna slow things down.
Maybe more multifamily pressure.
Yeah.
But, and I think to the area you're going, is that part of our process as well with that, 6,000 residents? And just, again, to remind us where we got to that 22, that combines on average the growth that we've seen over the last 20 years, kind of combined that together to then say if that pace of growth, there was kind of a heavy growth pace and then we slowed for the last 10 years after the recession. So, it kind of, averages that out, and so we'd expect if that continued to happen for the next 20, 25 years, that's where that would get us. So just kind of understanding the phase perspective there, but part of our exercise as well is to say, if we develop at an average density of 6 units per acre, that means that we're gonna need in general, X acres of development so that we can start to truth and prioritize some of these areas. As well, maybe not to the level of a phasing plan where we're saying this is 5 years and this is 10 years and this is 20 years, but understanding as well what that total land consumption is as well. That will also help, particularly as you're having conversations with the townships and those large tract property owners. Again, we have the authority to plan, and we should have a plan in place so that we know and can manage what we're doing, but just because, something is somewhere doesn't mean that it's going to happen.
And your numbers, your population does include the university, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that one's a little, in any university, can be a little wonky because those numbers change.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
flow too, but.
They start studying from home and.
Yeah, so.
I just think we should wrap up.
I
think you're tired.
Perfect. Well, yeah, I think, we've also started, maybe the last piece is we're thinking about infill and redevelopment too, is we as staff have been looking at what's in the Kinney corridor plan from that master plan and doing a little proofing of in the last 3 years that we've experienced and where we're heading from a policy direction, what still makes sense from what that master plan says and how do we want to translate what's there and those changes into some redevelopment opportunities as well. So really, and I'll just kind of hit on summary here and jump right into it. What we're going to do for the next, so we will, again, won't plan to have a meeting with you all in August, but we'll plan to meet again in September, but there will be some, like the goals and land use categories we'll get out to you. But in that time for us working and putting some colors to maps and getting some activities going here, that really helps us then and start to inform the other plan elements and some truthing and things in those kind of concepts. The other piece that we've been working on as well is just the long-term, what the next 9 months look like for us. So just as a quick heads up, that schedule really uses the rest of 2022 to finish our planning analysis and drafting the plan, looking at the October-November timeframe where we're starting to talk through implementation. We've started to look at essentially a joint workshop between you all and the council to talk through implementation and some of those things. We also want to make sure that you guys are updated on the status of the other 2 plans as well, because they feed into the comprehensive plan and just your roles as plan commissioners. But then what that means is 2023 is really review of that draft document. So January would be your opportunity to review before it goes out for public review in February, and then adoption in March is really the schedule that has been laid out at this point. So. Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into that review process. That takes 3 months. It seems like a lot, but it needs to give people the time to take a look at that kind of stuff too. So, anyway, I think that's it for me. Now I'll go have some tea, so I can. But I think
If you are deep down, you really want to look at the corridor plan and look at that map and kind of truth it and take a look at it, give us information, you can go ahead and do that too.
I actually have the Kinney corridor plan with me. And it's flagged, so you know I do read it, highlighted, there's little marks in it.
Good.
I'll stick with heroin.